read from but we see farther, right?
We have to read it.
Yeah. So we'll read each sentence and we'll see how much we understand. Okay. The chapter is the eternal and the individual. So shall we start?
Yes.
Okay. So I am reading each sentence and let's see. The Srinivas language, as I said again and again, is very complicated because he is precise. That's why it becomes complicated. Okay. But we see further that in the end, this Purusha, this cause and self of our individuality, comes to embrace the whole world and all other beings in a sort of conscious extension of itself and to perceive itself as one with the world being. Okay. So, he has told you that the Purusha is the consciousness, okay, and it's a personal consciousness. Then you can identify it as something, a person. Okay? The Purusha always implies that. So this Purusha personal aspect can be right from the top to the lowest. Remember that. At the highest level, the Purusha is the Purushottama. Okay, is a God in a personal form. But at the lowest level also, everything has got a personal aspect. Okay, as we have discussed many times earlier, all the impersonal forces in the physical world also have a personal aspect. Okay. The wind, which is absolutely impersonal, there is a Marut, Marut, okay, there is a personal aspect. There is a personal aspect of fire, Agni. There is a personal aspect of water, okay, Varuna, etc., etc. Everything has got a personal aspect and an impersonal aspect. Okay. Just as I said, a grain of salt is the personal aspect, and the impersonal aspect is the salt in the sea, which is impersonal. It is there everywhere. So this is what he's saying. We're saying, but we see further that in the end, this Purusha at the highest level, this cause and self of our individuality. The Purusha is creates the individuality, but at the highest level, it's a divine individuality. At the lower level, it becomes the like the grain of salt, like the body, mind, life. It becomes the imperfect, limited individuality. Comes to embrace the whole world and all other beings in a sort of conscious extension of itself. Now, this is the cosmic consciousness. When you are identified with your body, mind, life, you think you are body, mind, life, and that's the ego. The ego makes you think that. But when you escape from the body, mind, life and go up, you can experience a oneness with everybody else because that grain of salt has become the salt in the sea. So every point in the sea is part of yourself. Okay, salt is there everywhere. So your individuality, the individual self, becomes the universal self. That's a cosmic consciousness. And the cosmic consciousness, if you remember, there are two types of cosmic consciousnesses. You see the whole world within yourself. That's the one way, the comprehensive consciousness. And the other is you see yourself in everybody else. Srivendra has got both in his sonnets, he describes both. In the first one, he says, the largest stars in the universe are burning within me. So that's a comprehensive consciousness, cosmic consciousness. Then the other one, he says in another sonnet, if you are interested, I'll give you the reference to the sonnets later on. But I'm just telling you, this, there are quite a few sonnets. Srivendra has written a huge number of sonnets. So, and he says that to whichever person I turn, I see myself, but with another face. So essentially, you are everybody else, but with a different outward appearance. That's what he's saying here. So, you come to embrace the whole world and all other beings, everything. Beings, he is using the word, not only humans, but also even animals, you can see yourself in everything else in a sort of conscious extension of itself. This word extension also is interesting because your consciousness is normally limited to the body. You, uh, some people are very sensitive and the aura goes outside the body and It's very interesting, but they have seen also how birds on a electric wire, they sit at a certain minimum distance. They don't come too close. Okay? Also, you will feel that your aura keeps a distance between yourself and many others. Sometimes if you are in a queue, you will feel very disturbed if someone is too close to you. Okay? You want to keep a distance. That's the aura which is outside the body. But this aura outside the body can extend itself. So that's why Siddhartha is using the word extend, conscious extension of itself, and the aura can go far out. Sometimes you can experience it as you feel, oh, it's about 100 meters away. When there is a descent of consciousness or a force or power or a peace, normally the experience is of peace. When the peace descends onto you, you feel yourself widened. You feel yourself to be far. You feel, oh, 100 meters, I'm still everywhere. Okay, you feel like that. And that's an extension. But it need not be only 100 meters, it can be several miles. Like in mother's case, when she was coming from Sri Lanka, she felt Srimdo's aura. Okay. Some places they say 10 kilometers and some places they say 2 kilometers, but we don't know exactly what it is. But anyway, the principle is the same. It extends all over. So this is the Purusha can become the grain of salt, limited and individualized, but it can also be the real individual which is embracing the whole world. Okay? Impersonal. The individuality becomes impersonal. So I'm reading the next sentence. In its conscious extension of itself, it exceeds the primary experience and abolishes the barriers of its active self-limitation and individualization. So when it is conscious extension, when it is in the cosmic consciousness, it exceeds the primary experience. The primary experience is obviously, he is referring to your identification with body, mind, life. That's the primary experience. And it abolishes the barriers of its active self-limitation and individualization, which is again the body. So, and also ego. Okay. So ego also is the barrier to the active self-limitation. That self-limitation is active in our normal case, but it becomes passive when you realize that there is a connection with the body. But in the beginning, there's no connection at all. You are the witness only, no connection. But when you become the jnata and the bharta, then that connection comes. So Sri Aurobindo will use the word maybe there passive, okay, self-limitation. Passive self-limitation. But here he is using the word active self-limitation. Active self-limitation, our case. We really believe that this is what I am, my body, mind, life. So how interesting, Sri Aurobindo is using very accurate words, you can see. But when you lose your active self-limitation, you go to the self and there you feel yourself to be unconnected with the body. You become the witness only. But later on, as I said, you become the bharta. You become the, oh, I am the one supporting my body, mind, life. Then there is some sort of connection which you can call passive self-limitation. Okay, and individualization. So the ego, by its perception of its own infinite universality, it goes beyond all consciousness of separative individuality or limited soul being. Even the soul is in the beginning ignorance because it identifies itself with the body, mind, life. That disappears, as they say. Okay. It, by its perception, it breaks the barriers and becomes its perception of its own infinite universality. You feel yourself to be everywhere. All consciousness, separative individuality. The sense of separation goes away. Yesterday, in our Life Divine class, another class, not this one, we were talking about how do you define knowledge and ignorance, vidya and avidya. You can, in a very broad way, say that you are in avidya, you are in ignorance, when you see the many without the unity. Okay? When you see, not think of, but when you see the many and they are real to you. then you are in ignorance. But when you go to the higher level of consciousness, in the spiritual place of consciousness, and you start seeing the oneness which Surendra is mentioning here, its perception of its own infinite universality. You feel yourself to be everywhere. That is Vidya. But even in Vidya, there are grades. Okay? As you keep going higher and higher, the Vidya becomes less and less dark and less limited. Okay? So, all conscious separative individuality or limited soul. Note the word limited soul being. There are many who feel that the soul is perfect from the beginning. It is not. Surendra is very clearly using the word limited soul being. Okay? Even the soul limits itself in the beginning. Purposely, because it wants to adventure. It wants to put itself in a prison and escape from the prison. Okay? By that very fact, the individual ceases to be the self-limiting ego. The moment you come out of your body-mind life and go to the consciousness of the self, the ego disappears. Because that's exactly what makes you feel separate from everybody else. And if that goes away, obviously the ego has gone. But does the ego go away entirely? There are grades there also. Surendra says very interestingly that the ego, the active identification with body-mind life may not be there. But some sort of limitation is there, because all limitation goes right up to the overmind level. But the limitation becomes thinner and thinner and thinner. But there is a limitation even at the overmind level, because you see a difference between Purusha and Prakriti. You see a difference between the overmind consciousness and the world. Spirit and matter seem to be different. They are, both are there, both are true in the overmind consciousness, but they are not connected. That connection becomes very clear in the supramental world. Okay? By that very fact, the individual ceases to be the self-limiting ego. In other words, our false consciousness of existing only by self-limitation, by rigid distinction of ourselves from the rest of being and becoming, is transcended. So there are two types of distinction. There is being and becoming. Okay? Even when you go to the self, you are conscious that you are one with everybody else. So what is that you are one with everybody else? That's a being. Okay? And becoming is the body-mind life. Becoming is in the lower being. So there is a sort of, in fact, in synthesis he says that the ego, the gross ego disappears in the self. But then when you are in the self and you see that you are not doing anything, which is an experience of the self, you are not the doer of action, still you may feel that you are the instrument of the divine. So the instrumental ego comes in. Ego doesn't disappear entirely. Because if you think of what is the connection between the ego and the individuality, you will see that there is a gradation. The ego is a very gross sense of separation. And at the higher levels also, someone is experiencing the cosmicity. Okay, someone is experiencing the cosmic consciousness. That someone is the individual. But the individual is now not limited to the body, mind, life. So you have three grades of ego. Gross ego, then instrumental ego. You feel that, okay, I am not doing anything, but the divine is doing through me. So you have the instrumental ego. Then there is even a very faint, thin spiritual ego. That also is there. Because the individuality, okay, becomes, from the limited individual, it becomes the infinite individual. So when you speak of individual, you have to extend your understanding of things. So individual, the word itself suggests some sort of limitation. But it's possible to lose that also entirely. No? As we said, that when you are in the cosmic consciousness, you are conscious that you are in the cosmic consciousness. But there is a consciousness which can go, you become the cosmic consciousness, and there is nobody now experiencing that. Okay? You become the sea. You are not the wave experiencing that I am part of the sea. Okay. So the waves completely disappear, you become the sea. That is the Buddhistic solution. So I go to the next sentence. By rigid distinction of ourselves from the rest of being and becoming its transcendent. Our identification of ourselves with our personal and temporal individualization in a particular mind and body is abolished. The identification with body and mind is gone. But is all truth of individuality and individualization abolished? Does the Purusha cease to exist, or does he become the world Purusha and live intimately in innumerable minds and bodies? Okay. So this is the question that he is asking. Does individuality disappear entirely? And now he will give you the answer. And note also, interestingly, the second sentence begins with a lowercase, because this is also typically Srinivas's style of writing. The two questions are related, therefore he doesn't feel the need of putting a capital letter on does. Okay, he puts a lowercase. This is something that he does. I don't think anybody else does that. But it's very interesting, because when he does that, you know that he is formulating the same question in two different ways. Okay. But is all truth of individuality and individualization abolished completely? Does the Purusha cease to exist, or does he become the world Purusha and live intimately in innumerable minds and bodies? Then Srivastava answers, we do not find it to be so. In other words, the individuality is not abolished. He still individualizes, and it is still he who who exists and embraces this wider consciousness while he individualizes. Now think of Mother and Shivam, though they are in the cosmic consciousness, obviously, much more than the cosmic consciousness. Yet, when you go to them and you talk to them, they will recognize you as either Soki or Yasmin or Archanadi or Shilpa. So how is that possible without the individualization? Okay. So there is an individualization at the lower level and there is a universalization at the higher level. And it is quite compatible. The two are quite compatible. That's what Srivastava is saying. We do not find it to be so. He still individualizes and is still he who exists and embraces this wider consciousness while he individualizes. Now this is very interesting, this sentence, because that's exactly the need of limiting yourself to be in the physical world. I think I gave you once the idea of Ramakrishna. Okay. In fact, there are two stories about him. One story is that he used to go shoot up into the Nirvikalpa Samadhi, which is the absolute cosmic consciousness without the sense of individuality. He used to go up. And his body is now totally not aware of the physical world. The consciousness has gone out. But he had work to do. And the mother, Divine Mother, tells him that you can't do that. You can't remain all the time there. You have work to do in the physical world. Come down. So he used to individualize himself. How do you do that? By limiting yourself. How do you limit yourself? By having a little bit of ignorance or a little bit of desire. That desire will pull you down. It's like an anchor or the boat. If the boat is not anchored, then it will start floating all over and go here and there. Then it will be a total mess for the port, because the ship can't go on moving. It has to be fixed. So that fixing is done by a small desire, a harmless desire. Okay? So he used to say, "Ami jal khabo." I think I've told you this before, but this is the way of individualizing yourself. Okay. Mother also speaks of the same. Because when she is at that highest level of consciousness, when she is having interviews with Satprem and telling him all the experience that she had, she says that when I am in this individual consciousness, it is not possible to describe the experiences that I have at the highest level. Words fail. So both are possible. The cosmic consciousness without individual cosmic consciousness, and the limited cosmic consciousness with which you are only using as an instrument for dealing in the world. You are not limited by it. Like us, we are limited by it. In fact, we are not even conscious of our higher being. So, now see the sentence. he still individualizes and is still he who exists and embraces this wider consciousness while he individualizes. So he remains infinite, but he chooses to individualize himself. But the mind no longer thinks of a limited temporary individualization as all ourselves, but only as a wave of becoming thrown up from the sea of its being, or else as a form of center of universality. The description given here corresponds to the second level of the supermind, which can be experienced in the lower planes of consciousness also. And that experience is the wave is fully conscious that it is part of the sea. This is the second status of the supermind. In the third status of the supermind, this wave begins to forget that it is part of the sea. It becomes more and more individualized. It is beginning to forget it is part of the sea. When it comes down to the overmind level, yes, it has now become the individual wave. It has forgotten the sea. It's not actually true, because at the overmind level also you can have that, but the tendency towards the forgetting of that you are one with my body is matter, universal matter. You forget, you don't think of it that way. Okay? So, but only as a wave, this is a very interesting image that he is using. Only as a wave of becoming thrown up from the sea of its being, or else as a form of center of universality. Center of universality, not the words. The universality cannot have a center, but it has a center when you individualize yourself. The soul still makes the world becoming the material for the individual experience. But instead of regarding it as something outside and larger than itself, on which it has to draw, by which, but instead of regarding it as something outside and larger than itself, on which it has to draw, by which it is affected, by which it has to make accommodations, it is aware of it subjectively as within itself. The whole universe is within yourself. It embraces both its world material and its individualized experience of spatial and temporal activities in a free and enlarged consciousness. In fact, we can put it very graphically. You feel now, I'm sure all of us do feel, that my consciousness is in the body. You don't feel your consciousness is somewhere else. You feel it's in the body. But when you go to the self, you will feel that the body is in your consciousness. That's exactly what he's saying. And that's why Mother uses the word renversement de conscience. There is a reversal of consciousness. At our level, the consciousness is in the body. But at the spiritual level, the body is in the consciousness. You have gone beyond the body. You have extended, your aura extended itself, and now you are conscious of your aura. Okay? So that's what he's saying. It is aware of it subjectively as within itself. It embraces both its world material and its individualized experience of spatial and temporal activities in a free and enlarged consciousness, not a compulsorily imprisoned consciousness. It is free and enlarged consciousness. In this new consciousness, the spiritual individual perceives its true self to be one in being with the transcendence, not only the cosmic but even the transcendence, and seated and dwelling within it, and no longer takes its constructed individuality as anything more than a formation for world experience. Note the word constructed individuality is your body-mind life. Who is constructing your body? Universal matter. Who is constructing your vital being? Universal prana. So are constructed, because what is constructed will get destroyed also. So you don't identify yourself with the constructed body-mind life, which is your outer nature. Okay. So Srinivas's language is so clear and he is explaining it so beautifully. No longer takes its constructed individuality as anything more than a formation for world experience. Okay. So it's 8:15 only. We can read the next paragraph. Our unity with the world being. One of you has to read. So,
Shall I read?
okay.
Our unity with the world being is the consciousness of a self, which at one and the same time cosmicizes in the world and individualizes through the individual Purusha. And both in that world being and in this individual being and in all individual beings, it is aware of the same self manifesting and experiencing its various manifestations. That then is a self which must be one in its being. Otherwise, we could not have this experience of unity, and yet must be capable in its very unity of cosmic differentiation and multiple individuality. The unity is its being, yes, but the cosmic differentiation and the multiple individuality are the power of its being, which it is constantly displaying and which it is its delight and the nature of its consciousness to display. If then we arrive at unity with that, if we even become entirely and in every way that being, why should the power of its being be excised, and why at all should we desire or labor to excise it? We should then only diminish the scope of our unity with it by an exclusive concentration accepting the divine being, but not accepting our part in the power and consciousness and infinite delight of the divine. It would in fact be the individual seeking peace and rest of union in a motionless identity, but rejecting delight and various joy of union in the nature and act and power of the divine existence. That is possible, but there is no necessity to uphold it as the ultimate aim of our being or as our ultimate perfection.
This is what Srinath is now distinguishing between the integral yoga and the yoga as usually understood in India. Liberation is the aim of life, aim of the yoga. That's the usual idea after the Buddhist and the Mayavada philosophy came into the being. The world is imperfect permanently, get away from it. So Srinath is saying that is possible. But why should we do that? It's not inevitable. Okay? Liberation is only the first step, he said. So we'll look at carefully what he's saying. Okay? So, our unity with the world being is the consciousness of a self, which at one and the same time cosmicizes in the world and individualizes through the individual Purusha. Okay? So it's possible to be absolutely in the body mind life, number one. That's our condition. It is also possible for you to be absolutely beyond the body mind life in the highest level of consciousness and realize yourself as the divine. That also is possible. The Srimad is saying, why not both together? That's exactly what he's saying in this sentence. And that's what he wants, because he doesn't want to reject the physical world. So if you go to the highest level and reject the physical world, then you are getting only the divine peace and calm. Okay. But the power is not there. Why? Because the power is in the physical world. What is power? Movement, action. Okay. If there is no action, the power is held back. So if you are in the physical world only, there is power. Okay. If you are identified with the universe, you can exercise your power. At the highest level, power is there, but you are not exercising it. So therefore, there can be no ananda also, relatively speaking. Of course, ananda can be there, but it is relatively, there is more ananda in a sense in the physical world, because all the possibilities are there. At the highest level, they are all there in seed form, but in the physical world. So this is what Swami is saying. Note the words carefully. Our unity with the world being, okay, that means cosmic consciousness, is a consciousness of the self. The self is the Atman, which is infinite, eternal, immutable, okay, featureless, which at one and the same time cosmicizes in the world. You become one with the world and also individualizes through the individual Purusha. Okay. You are at once salt in the sea as well as the grain of salt. But the grain of salt you are only using for action in the physical world. And both in that world being and in this individual being and in all individual beings, it is aware of the same self manifesting and experiencing its various manifestations. You see the divine presence in everything. I'm using a very vague word, divine presence. That is the self in everybody. That self which is there in you is there in everybody else. That then is a self which must be one in its being. It's essentially only one. Everywhere is the same. Otherwise, we could not have this experience of unity. And yet must be capable in its very unity of cosmic differentiation and multiple individuality. Okay. So here we the seed and the tree at the same time. That's what he's saying. Okay. It's possible to be at the lower level, identify yourself with the body, mind, life, and not the unity. It's possible to have experience only of the unity on top, without the multiplicity. But Srimad wants both together. Why? Because then you can be part of the evolution in the physical world. If you escape and disappear from, you cannot participate in the physical world's evolution. So why not participate in the evolution and enjoy life, enjoy existence? That's what he's saying. The unity is its being. Okay? Being the immutable. Okay? Being is the immutable, becoming is the mutable. Remember that. The unity is its being, the immutability. Yes, but the cosmic differentiation and the multiple individuality are the power of its being, which it is constantly displaying and which it is delight and the nature of its consciousness to display. So, although it is one, it is constantly creating the many and enjoying what it is doing. And your individual consciousness, when it becomes part of the same, the divine consciousness, then you also start enjoying. That's what it's saying. Okay. But then why does the ascetic disappear? Why does he disappear? Because he has got an idea to begin with that the many are limitations, and I don't want limitations. I want the infinite peace, and he gets a peace. Okay. So, but Srimad is saying that you can be in the physical world also. If then we arrive at unity with that, okay, normally he would put a capital T for that. That means the Satchidananda which is present everywhere. If we even become entirely and in every way that being, why should the power of its being be excised? Excise is to cut. Okay? To excise, yeah, when you are in a war and your hand gets cut off, it's excised. Okay? So it is the word nothing to do with exercise. Okay? Exercise is to cut. And why at all should we desire to labor or exercise it? He is talking about the ascetic who takes the trouble of cutting himself off from the physical world. So Swami is saying, okay, you can do that. But why do you don't need to do it? But what Swami is proposing is much more difficult. That's the reason why the ascetic rejects the body, mind, life. Okay? But Swami is saying, reject the body, mind, life to begin with, but once you have got the higher consciousness, come down into the body, mind, life and transform it and enjoy life, enjoy existence. Okay? We should then only diminish the scope of our unity with it by an exclusive concentration, accepting the divine being, but not accepting our part in the power and consciousness and infinite delight of the divine. So he's saying that the ascetic, when he gets liberated, he gets peace. He may also get ananda, he may also get power, but he is not able to use all that in the physical world because he has said, I don't want this house. So if you don't want the house, what can you do without the house? So the house is the body, mind, life. So come down here and use that power and ananda that you have got. That's what Swami is saying. Don't shoot yourself into the infinite, but enjoy all the different aspects of the multiplicity of the forms in the physical world. And if you do that, you will enjoy because you will see the divine power, how it is creating all these forms. Okay? The different types of enjoyments that you can get in the physical world. We also get enjoyments when we eat fruits or we are tasting success, everything we are enjoying. But our enjoyment is impure because it is enjoying only some things. But when you are in that consciousness, it is possible to enjoy everything. So Srimad is for power and enjoyment even in the physical world. Okay, that's what he said. We should then only diminish the scope of our unity. The ascetic is limiting himself to only the Ananda at the highest level and the power, but he is not able to utilize that in the physical world because he has rejected the physical world. In his will, he has given up the rights to his house. Okay, so we should then only diminish. So, but why should we do it? Should they say? We should then only diminish the scope of our unity with it by an exclusive concentration, accepting the divine being, but not accepting our part in the power and consciousness and the infinite delight of the universe. It would, in fact, be the individual seeking peace and the rest of union in a motionless identity. That's what the ascetic is doing, and that was the idea of liberation in India for a long time. Okay? But rejecting delight and various joy of union in the nature and act and power in the divine existence. The divine existence in the physical world. That is possible, but there is no necessity to uphold it as an ultimate aim of our being or as our ultimate perfection. So I'm saying this because in India, the aim of life was liberation. Okay. But Sriranda wants to go beyond that. That's why he says that the integral yoga starts where the others are ending. This is not a statement of a sense of superiority at all. It's a fact. Yeah. After getting the liberation, the integral yoga starts. You have to come down to the physical world and perfect your body, mind, life, and become an instrument of the divine. That's what he's saying. So, we have 25, 28. We have got about definitely more than 10 minutes. So we can read the next paragraph also. Or the one possible reason. So shall we read that?
Shall I read?
Yes, yes, ma'am. Do.
Or the one possible reason would be that in the power, the act of consciousness there is not real union, and that only in the status of consciousness is there perfect undifferentiated unity. Now, in what we may call the waking union of the individual with the divine, as opposed to a falling asleep or a concentration of the individual consciousness in an absorbed identity, there is certainly and must be a differentiation of experience. For in this active unity, the individual Purusha enlarges its active experience also, as well as its static consciousness, into a way of union with the self of his being and of the world being. And yet, individualization remains and therefore differentiation. The Purusha is aware of all other individuals as selves of himself. He may be a dynamic union, become aware of their mental and practical action as occurring in his universal consciousness. But as he is aware of his own mental and practical action, he may help to determine their action by subjective union with them, but still there is a practical difference. The action of the divine in himself is that which he is particularly and directly concerned. The action of the divine in his other selves is that with which he is universally concerned, not directly, but through and by his union with them and with the divine. The individual therefore exists, though he exceeds the little separated ego. The universe exists and is embraced by him, but it does not absorb and abolish all individual differentiation, even though by this universalizing himself, the limitation which we call the ego is overcome.
Okay. So this is, he is giving you all the gradations between the highest and the lowest. Just now, as you said, in the highest, you become the divine, but devoid of the universe. The universe doesn't exist for you. Okay, you are interested only in the divine, the transcendent. The transcendent consciousness is that which is you experience as only the divine, Satchidananda, And the world doesn't exist for you. You are concentrated. You, like a black hole, your whole attention is only on yourself without the universe. No extension, only inward movement, no outward movement. And at our level, it is exactly the opposite. We are dispersed. Our consciousness is dispersed to the body, mind, life, and the universe. We are aware of the world outside ourselves, but we are not aware of what is inside us. Srinath is giving you the gradation between the two. There can be a combination of the highest and the lowest in different grades. So what are those grades? He is telling you one by one. Okay, so we'll try to go through. I don't know if we can finish it, but we'll try to go through. Or the one possible reason would be that in the power, the act of consciousness, there is no real union, and that only in the status of consciousness is there perfect and undifferentiated unity. What he's saying is, he's trying to justify the ascetic proposal. He's saying that they don't want the they don't want to remain in the physical world because there you are in multiplicity, but they want the undifferentiated unity. That's an individual choice. They want only the total divine consciousness without the universe. That's what I want. That's what they're saying. It could be that is the reason. Or the one possible reason why the ascetic is wanting to reject the world would be that in the power, the act of consciousness, in the power in the physical world, okay? Power means action, movement. In the power, the act of consciousness, there is not real union. And that only in the status of consciousness, power and status, remember, of consciousness is a perfect, undifferentiated unity. Okay? You can experience, the wave can experience itself as part of the sea, but it's also possible that it does not full the undifferentiated unity will be that the wave doesn't exist and you become the sea. That's what the ascetic wants. And if he wants that, then he's within his rights to want it. That's what Sridhar seems to be saying. If he wants it, let him have it. But there are other choices also. And I would prefer the other choices, Sridhar is saying. Now, in what we call the waking union of the individual with the divine, as opposed to a falling asleep or a concentration of the individual consciousness in an absorbed identity. I will stop here. So, Sridhar is making a difference between a waking union. You are aware of the physical world as well as the divine. And there is the other one, you are aware of the divine fully without the physical world. So that's what is making a distinction. And the ascetic is wanting the other one, and Sridhar is saying, no, we want the other one. We want a waking consciousness. And there also, it is not absolutely true that you are limiting yourself if you are part of the being in the physical world. The identity on top can be absolutely identified with the divine, and yet you are choosing to have a connection with the physical world. That's possible. That's what they say. I read that sentence again, you will see very clearly. Now, in what we may call the waking union of the individual with the divine. That's what Sridhar wants. As opposed to a falling asleep or a concentration of the individual consciousness in an absorbed identity. In other words, no connection with the physical world. You have fallen in the physical world, you are asleep. There is certainly and must be a differentiation of experience. Okay. So there are gradations for in this active unity. So active unity, Sridhar's ideal. I have unity with the divine, but I am in the activity of the physical world. I am not in the static, passive unity. I am in the active unity, in the physical world. The individual Purusha enlarges his active experience also, as well as his static consciousness, into a way of union with the self of his being and of the world being, and yet individualization remains, and therefore differentiation. Okay. So, in other words, Shankara is saying the You can have, essentially the individual soul is that of the divine. And there is another Ramanuja who says that no, you can have the divine consciousness and yet you can be aware of your individual soul. Okay. And there is Madhvacharya who says that the individual soul can always be, is always separate from the divine soul. You can have a relation with the divine, but you can't become the divine. So these are the three grades that he's talking about in this physical, in the world. Okay, is 836. So basically, that's what he's saying. But Srivendra is saying it is preferable to be in the, because there are other choices. Na? When the others are saying that you can be here, you can be there, none of them are talking about the evolution in the physical world. And if you want to participate in the divine work of evolution in the physical world, then you have to have a connection with the body, mind, life. You have to have a connection with the physical world. And that's what I prefer. This is very same. Okay. So now, okay, we got 3 minutes more. The Purusha is aware of all other individuals as self of himself. He may, by a dynamic union, note the word, it's not a passive union, it's a dynamic union, become aware of their mental and practical action as occurring in his universal consciousness. In other words, Mother and Srivendra can identify yourself with your vital and your mind, because your individual vital and your individual mind, okay, can be experienced by them, just as he is aware of his own mental and practical action. He may help to determine their action by subjective union with them. This is very interesting. This is how the Guru helps. Okay, the Guru is in a cosmic consciousness and he can know your mental state and your emotional state, and by identifying himself with your condition, now your problem becomes his problem and he can solve it easily because he has the power. Okay, so that's what the Guru, this is how the Guru helps others. Okay? But still there is a practical difference. I think we have to stop here today, but we will do this last portion next week. Okay, so note down the. So I think the difference is clear now. There are two different consciousnesses. The consciousness of the self-absorbed divine at the highest level, the consciousness of the diffused consciousness of ignorance in the lower level, and there are gradations between the two. Okay, that's what Srivendra is saying. I would like to join. Okay, like he says in the marrying the soil to the sky in the God's labor. Okay? He wants the spirit to be your father and the earth to be your mother. Okay? He doesn't want to reject either the higher or the lower. The materialist is rejecting the higher and the ascetic is rejecting the lower, but Srivendra wants both. Okay, so we stop here today and you note down.
Merci beaucoup.
Okay.